For all things gridiron and hard top, it's Kevlu and Steve since the Sandbox.
What's going on since the Sandbox fans? We're here. It's a very special episode. You guys hearing this right now? Need to introduce the third triplet, the third Scarpa brother. You guys have heard Uncle Tony. You guys have heard Mike. Now Ben's here. Yep. So Ben, we're gonna be talking about our top. Last. Yeah, right. We're gonna be talking about our top draft prospects today. But before we get into this episode, you were a college athlete. You played college football over at Ithaca. Do you want to dive in on what that experience was for you, just very quickly?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously went to Ithaca D3. Nothing crazy.
The Bombers.
The Bombers. Yeah, hell yeah. They have a very good program down in Ithaca. Very happy to have played there. Got to finish out the year at MetLife,
That's right.
Steven's favorite stadium in the world. But it was a great experience. Obviously I can't relate to these guys in the draft coming up, but college football is college football. No matter what division it is, it's on the gridiron. So, happy to have played and say I played, but on to bigger and better things now.
That's right. So Ben was really excited to talk about the draft prospects.
Yep.
Usually Lou's here to do the draft process with me. He hasn't been here.
Sorry,
yet,
Lou.
Just because of work and things like that. But Ben's a perfect replacement. So what we're going to do, we're going to highlight, some of like the top 15, 20 guys that are going on throughout the draft process right now. We'll do some comparisons. We'll find perfect fits. We'll talk about the draft order and compare them to the group and where some of the NFL teams really need for these positions to be satisfied by. So, Ben, we can't start it off with the quarterback because that would just be too easy for all of our listeners. So, one of our most deep positions, in this draft class, something I think all the listeners are expecting to hear is the wide receivers. And, every single year, wide receiver class comes through. Usually the deepest one out of most of the groups. But, you can really relate to this being, a wide receiver or a running back. You had that Cordell Patterson type skill set for Ithaca, for MC, during your time playing. But, we have a bunch of guys on this list. We know the combine concluded. We know pro days are coming up. Free agency starting today. So now it kind of is easier for us to kind of see where these draft guys are going to take fit. And, this is all just predictions on what we think, what would make sense and what's logical. So coming in with one of the top wide receiver prospects, who I think could possibly be the best wide receiver prospect in this draft, Drake London from USC.
Yeah, I got him at 1-2.
Do you?
Yeah.
So this is obviously, a guy that has, the little bit of a bigger mold compared to some of the other guys. But, a lot of these wide receivers too, they have the fast 40 time along with having the builds and things like that. And that's really developed, over time because we weren't always seeing, the wide receivers that had both. It was like, okay, you had the tall slot guy or you had the big outside guy that would go up and get it. So I just want to know, what your perspective is. Do you think, you can be a guy that has, the mold of both to play both positions? You think you should always, play towards your scheme? Just some things like that, that go along with what analysts and scout departments have to go through when it comes to like draft prospects. And obviously with Drake London being, of that bigger mold and things like that, maybe you could even give us a fit on where you think he would go for some of the top picks.
Yeah, so I think Drake London, I think he's just his ability to stretch the field is, it really separates him. Even coming out of high school, he was the top recruit in high school, and then USC, he was the guy. So, he's always been in the spotlight and obviously isn't afraid of it. But I think one flaw with Drake London, he does love to catch with the body. He doesn't have the solid hands, but then again, that's something that NFL teams can work with.
Okay, then.
But I see Drake London being a great fit for teams, like the Patriots or Detroit, who really need those deep threats, who are really lacking help with the QBs and need to get moving downfield. So, I see him there. I even saw him in the Giants. I could see that being a good match for me on the line as well.
Hey, listen, I would definitely take that. Drake London is going to be, a name up there with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Treylon Burks, for some of the top guys to go in the draft. And
deep class.
Yeah, no, it really is. And we were just talking about, the wide receiver position and what the draft is going to look like since we were talking about some of the free agency news. But, it's tough because you've seen wide receivers go, top 5. You've seen wide receivers go top 10. But I don't know if any of these guys stick out to me, in the way that Jalen Waddle or Jamar Chase did, just comparing this to last year's draft. But I definitely think that, there's definitely some talent in this class that can go round one.
Speed.
Yeah, no, definitely a
speed.
lot of speed in that big playability. A team that I think could go the wide receiver position, and I think this could be, the first place I really see Drake London going is Atlanta at 8.
Yeah.
I really think Atlanta is going to need, another wide receiver. We know the whole Calvin Ridley scenario going on. It's really, I don't want to say it's tough to understand, but, you obviously, toss Pete Rose's name in there when you start talking about betting sports and things like that. And Calvin Ridley was completely different. I mean, after a year of doing it already, he already came out and said that, that's what he was doing. With Pete Rose, he's still coming out not saying that he didn't do it or like this and that, whatever.
Know.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I definitely think Atlanta's an interesting name to keep in mind. And we also know recently that Seattle just traded into the top 10 with the trade that they did with the Broncos. But we'll talk about the quarterback position in a little bit. Both of these wide receivers coming from OSU, Ohio State, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. I just wanted you to go in depth a little bit about these two guys. If you had a preference on one that you would take, a reason why, and like I said, a place that you might see fit.
Yeah, I mean, from a size perspective first, which I think is pretty important at receiver, they're about the same build. Garrett Wilson 5'11", Chris Olave 6 foot. One thing that really separates these two is their route running, in my opinion.
Okay.
They're just crisp. They can do the inside in the slot, or they can go outside. Burn you on a deep ball. So they're very versatile. Something that is very valuable in the NFL. Can do the end around if they need to. I think they both ran sub 4.5 40s, or even 4.5.
There was like 9 wide receivers that legit ran a sub 4.40, and it was like, dude, we used to highlight the 3 or 4 guys every combine that would run.
Chris Olave particularly, I'm pretty sure he ran a 4.22 to start it off unofficial.
Yeah, the unofficial.
Unofficial, but we can count it unofficial. It's still 4.22.
Yeah. No, yeah, so Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, these are two guys that they're going to be taken in the first round.
Yeah.
And, I think it depends on needs. And, you see a couple of different teams, maybe like the Washington football team, right? You got Terry McLaurin over there. And, that's a guy that had, a pretty good college process and was a big recruit, but was also buried in a deep wide receiver class. So, this could be, a lot of the same. I think one of these two wide receivers, Washington, would be a great spot for them. Either at 11, but I also think Washington could be one of these teams that trade back now, too. Think of it, right? They just traded for Carson Wentz. They gave up some draft capital to get him. Now, with the wide receiver class being so deep, you already have in your number one guy, and you already have a running back. You have your tight end position all set with Logan Thomas. Yep. I definitely think that this is a place where, if you trade into the 20s, you could still get, a guy like a Traylon Burks or a Johan Dotson that could really, still make a difference in that first round. But, Washington's definitely a team that I think could attack the wide receiver position. Philly having back-to-back picks at 15 and 16.
Yeah, and 19. You never know.
That's what I'm saying. I definitely think they could go the wide receiver position there. But I talked about Traylon Burks. I talked about Jahan Dotson. These are all guys that I think are definitely going to go in the first round for sure. And now what I want to do is spend some time on the guys that could be covering the wide receivers in this class. And there's a lot of defensive backs. I just wanted to highlight a couple of them really quickly just because, these are guys that I arguably think will go in the top 10 above a lot of these wide receivers. So the first name off the rip, Kyle Hamilton at that safety position. He's kind of one of those guys that's the Swiss Army knife, right? Yeah. That can play all the positions in the defensive backfield. Depending on the scheme you run, he could be one of those guys that even fill in at the linebacker position for a sub package like Jabril Peppers does, right? And that's why Kyle Hamilton's name is really mentioned so often around some of the top prospects in this draft process coming from Notre Dame. But do you see a specific fit for Kyle Hamilton in this top 10? You think, it's too high to take a safety in the top 10, top 5? Give me the breakdown.
Yeah, so I know it's a little ungodly to pick a DB, like top 5. I think Kyle Hamilton, with his size, 6'4", 220, like you said, could fill in that linebacker role. So I think kind of being that little Swiss Army knife, I could see him going in the top 5. In my opinion, he's a top 3 draft pick, in the whole draft. So,
wow.
I think he's been doing it at Notre Dame since he was a freshman, all over the field, stopping the run game in the pass game, very, like I said, very versatile. So, in terms of best fit for him, I think it's just whatever team can get him first. I don't think there's a certain team out there that's going to, go out of the way for Kyle Hamilton. I think as soon as, a team's ready to draft, if he's there, you take him,
Yeah. No, I got you. And I think it's going to be interesting, too. Let's take a division like the AFC West, right? a team that's investing, franchise organizations that are investing so much in the quarterback position, you know,
they could definitely use them.
They could,
quarterbacks
exactly. That's what I'm saying. You could definitely see, you know, a change in draft style depending on teams' immediate needs, right? And yeah, you don't want to do like a drastic trade to give up too much future capital or compensation assets to, you know, sacrifice your future. But in the draft, you could also do a lot of moves that can make you win now, right? So I feel like that's really important. I think there are a couple teams in the top 5 that could really go after Kyle Hamilton. Now, look, these teams all have multiple needs since they're picking in the top 5. But we're talking about a team like the Jets, a team like Houston, a team like
they could all use them.
The Lions, they could all use them. I definitely think that, you know, teams will keep in mind of like the Jamal Adams scenario, right? Because this was somebody that was drafted, you know, as a top 10 pick, but he got the contract now, and it's like, oh, Jamal Adams, he's just a blitzer. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I could definitely see, you know, where the concerns come in with that same conversation. But I don't see Kyle Hamilton being a guy that's going to be picked outside of the top 10. And realistically, if he gets to the Giants' second pick at 7 overall, I don't see how they could pass him. You know, we're going to get rid of James Bradbury this offseason. With them having 2 picks in the top 10, it would give them the opportunity to go and get their tackle or go and get your premier pass rusher, and then also give you that secondary help that you're going to need to compete with Dak Prescott and the Cowboys having the deep wide receiver group that they have. But that's just one name out of the defensive backs that I really wanted to highlight. 2 more names that I absolutely think will be top 10 picks. Derek Stingley Jr. from LSU. We know LSU has prided themselves, you know, in being DB University, a wide receiver university, whatever you wanted to call it now. Yep. Do you think he's the best corner in the draft?
Personally, I don't want to say he's the best. You know, I am a big fan of Ahmad Gardner. You know, his length. Sauce Gardner, yep. His length, you know, like at the corner position, you know, you look at guys like J.C. Jackson, Jalen Ramsey, like they're lengthy, you know, they can cover, they're athletic. And I see a lot of that in Ahmad Gardner, you know, but going back to, you know, who you're talking about, I think that, you know, obviously athletically, you know, yes, like top corner, you know, like you said, LSU, DBU, you know, the corners they've been able to pronounce or to send out have been incredible, and they've all, you know, for the majority panned out in my opinion. Yeah. You know, so you can't overlook that and where he's come from. But, you know, in my personal opinion, I think Ahmad Gardner is the number 1 corner.
Listen, I don't disagree with you, and I definitely love that when a college player is coming through the process that they have that swag, right? And when you have a nickname like Sauce, right, you know that you got that swag.
And that's the most important thing for a DBs. You got to have some swag to you.
For sure,
you know?
For sure.
He's got it. He's already got the nickname.
And I was watching Good Morning Football a couple of weeks ago when the combine was going on, and Peter Schrager was talking about some of his top prospects, and throughout this, they were like, imagine, regardless if it was Jets or Giants, that, you know, with trying to get the franchise in a different direction, you draft a guy like Ahmad Sauce Gardner, right? He brings that swagger. Just imagine what the headlines you would see in, like, the New York Times with someone like that. Like, Joe Schoen and Brian Dable bringing that sauce. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
With Ahmad Gardner.
Like, that just rubs off on everyone else in the locker room,
of course.
Opinion. Especially being the DBs. Like, I mean, as a receiver, you know, going against all the DBs, they love to talk. You know, DBs are always going to flaunt, you know, always try to show off. So, you know, once you see Sauce Gardner in the locker room, he brings that juice. It's going to be contagious.
Yeah, it absolutely will. And, you know, you just refer back to, like, a Super Bowl team like the Rams, right?
Right.
Jalen Ramsey got that sauce.
Exactly.
He definitely got that swagger, and he's not afraid to tell you that he's the best.
Yep.
And I respect that about a DB. I respect that about a wide receiver. But your consistent play on the field is what shows that, right? And I feel like all of that's really important. Now, we got to get to the meat in our O-line and D-line, but we'll sprinkle in a little bit of the quarterback in between, because, you know, you can never just put the meat in without, you know, some of the sauce, without some of the seasoning. So we're going to sprinkle in the seasoning with the quarterbacks here. And, Ben, there's a lot of quarterbacks in this draft. You know, we talked about probably 5 or 6 names in this draft that can really be, you know, first-round guys, but we're not talking about the first-round guys that we're usually seeing with 2 or 3 guys going inside the top 10, right? Or at least not yet. We still have pro days that can come up and that can really change, you know, the direction of where these guys are being rumored to taking. Yeah. And we could probably still see some draft pick trade scenarios that could also make things interesting as well. But I wanted to talk to you about the 2 quarterbacks I think that are being talked about as the top prospects. And that's Malik Willis from Liberty and Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh. I personally think that Malik Willis is the best quarterback in the draft. Yep. I think he has the big arm. He did come from, the big school that you always wanted, but he wasn't getting the opportunity that he thought he deserved. So he transferred to Liberty and he balled out. Right. So I definitely got to show him some respect. I think Malik Willis could come off the board here at 9 in the latest out of the, the first picks. I definitely think that there's going to be a quarterback taken in the top 10. Mm-hmm. I just think that when it gets taken, that's obviously going to set up the domino effects for the rest of the quarterbacks to go around. And I really think, like I said, Malik Willis is the first one to come off the board. Mm-hmm. I think Seattle's an interesting spot at 9 once again, like I said. I don't think Drew Lock's the guy for them. We just saw with the Russell Wilson trade, some of the compensation that they were having. Me and Ben were actually talking about the compensation. Yeah. He thinks that Seattle got a good load of it. I think Denver got a Hall of Fame quarterback and didn't give up too much to get one. So, you can, very, very much understand.
Say it was a win-win.
Yeah, you can very much understand both of those perspectives, but time will only tell where that will go. Before we get into the quarterbacks, guys, make sure to go and check out the rest of the Cincy Sandbox content. Go and check out the Meet the People series. Episode 3 is with Steph Lewis. I just gave you my top 25. All of my top 25 is out 25-16, 15-6, 5-1. Make sure you guys go and listen to that. I gave you guys the free agency predictions, the free agency fits on where I think a lot of those guys are going to go. And there's so much more coming, but we also have to shout out Myoderm, guys. Myoderm is a company based out of Colorado. They just sent us some free product. It's CBD Sports Relief Cream. Ben tried it out for the Bada Bing flag football team that I'll be rejoining in the spring. Absolutely worked wonders. Ben, can you talk about it really quickly?
Yeah, definitely. So Steven actually gave it to me. We had a doubleheader, and safe to say we got smoked both games. But after a long 2 games, the hamstrings weren't feeling that right. 2 quick squirts of the CBD, and you're good to go. It's not like the icy hot where it smells. You can feel it. I know people do like to feel it, but it's instant work. Right then and there, and like I said, it's just no smell, nothing.
Absolutely.
Works like a charm.
Fast acting.
Yep.
And just like Ben said, the fragrance free. Those are some of the best parts. So guys, go and check out Myoderm. We're about to jump in with the quarterbacks. Make sure you're leaving a 5-star review because we deserve nothing less. Also, this is going to be our probably 355th podcast episode. Go to our social media. Help us celebrate episode 350. A huge milestone for Cincy Sandbox.
What an honor.
Legit. What an honor. Guys, back to the prospects, back to the quarterbacks. Ben, I just went in depth a little bit about Malik Willis, so feel free to share, your comments about Malik Willis, and then take it to Kenny Pickett. Interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. So when I made my top 5 for quarterbacks, I had Malik at 3. It's obviously not a knock to him or his athleticism. I think he has a strong arm, great football IQ, very competitive guy. But then you got to look at things like, he left Auburn to go to Liberty. Obviously it wasn't working out for him, and that's kind of a drastic change in my opinion. In terms of competition, like who you play, and that's something that scouts really take into consideration. So that's why I have him below Matt Corral and Kenny Pickett, and kind of going up that list. You look at a guy like Matt Corral, who was honestly the number 1 quarterback in the class when the season started. And then obviously kind of had above a mediocre year. In my opinion, I think he should have gone earlier. Same with Sam Howell, those kind of guys, who had great years and, decided with COVID and everything, very unfortunate, but they wrote it out. And, unfortunately it didn't work for him, but then you got a guy like Malik Willis, who obviously did work out for, he went to the combine, he killed it, showed his athleticism. I don't know if you saw his deep ball, but it was probably the best spiral I saw at the combine. Absolute bomb of a ball. But then you want to go to guys like Kenny Pickett, and, you want to talk about a high football IQ, this guy has it, but he is a little inconsistent. Sometimes he struggles with accuracy, same as Matt Corral. So that's what, in my opinion, would make Malik Willis, kind of above them too.
Okay.
But, looking long term, like I said, that competition is key to the NFL,
Yeah, and I do think, a lot of these quarterbacks, have very different skill sets too. Because I'll talk about someone like Desmond Ritter.
Yep.
This is definitely someone that, can run that play action, that run pass, the RPO. And, this is someone that also, even though they had, a all collegiate year at Cincinnati, it's like, do we see that consistency at the quarterback position, right? And his build is a lot different from like a Malik Willis or a Kenny Pickett.
He's like a Josh Allen kind of build almost at 6'4".
Absolutely. Absolutely. It just, does that arm talent, really match or go along with that? So a lot of that are questions that we're going to see and that we'll continue to ask, throughout the pro day and things like that. But something that I hear often about Kenny Pickett is the small hands, right?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to hear, what your opinion was on that. We've seen a bunch of different scenarios, a bunch of different guys come in. And, statistically speaking, there's more success linked to quarterbacks or prospects with larger hands than those with smaller hands. So just wanted to hear, your breakdown of that. Do you think it really just comes down to the tape? Do you think, some of that stuff matters? Do you think the combine has some immeasurable, like ridiculous things that they capture? Feel free to go in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that big of a deal. You look at guys like Joe Burrow also who had the same talks coming out of the draft, small hands, people were knocking him for it, and look how that worked for Joe Burrow. It was just in the Super Bowl, right? So,
yeah, they knocked him for being, a fifth-year player as well?
Exactly.
Yeah, fifth-year quarterback.
Exactly. Yeah, and honestly, I don't think it matters. I think that, at the end of the day, these kids are all just ballers, and, he's been Kenny Pickett, a guy who's probably been playing football his whole life. Like, I don't think his hand size is going to matter. I think he's able to throw the football. I get why it's important, I guess in terms of making sure the ball's more secure, tighter spiral, whatever it may be. But, watch Kenny Pickett throw the ball. He does throw a great spiral. He does throw, a deep ball. He's got a strong arm, like I said, a little inconsistent, but, can you really blame it on the hands?
No,
I don't think so.
Listen, I hear you, and look, just we're talking about some of these other quarterback scenarios. I have our draft selections all down here at the bottom. Can you tell me, some names, some teams that you really think are going to be targeting the quarterback? We talk about Seattle. I think Atlanta could be an interesting one. They just brought Matt Ryan back on a restructured deal. But, I wouldn't think that would be a bad scenario where Matt Ryan was the starter for a year or two and you really try and teach one of these guys up. But, there's a bunch of teams. Minnesota just re-signed Kirk Cousins for 1 year, but the future's definitely going to go in a different direction.
A lot of money for 1 year, too.
That's right, $35 million.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting direction for a team there at 12. Feel free to share, the teams that you think are going to go and invest in the quarterback position.
Yeah, well, so let me start. I don't think that there's really any franchise quarterbacks in this draft. I think that between the free agents in the market right now and last year's draft, I would say the quarterback position, isn't really that. I mean, obviously it's the most important position on the field, but, in terms of the draft this year, I don't think any team's really looking for that franchise quarterback out of this draft. So I do see a lot of teams picking quarterbacks in terms of development, and I think that Washington is one of those teams. I know they just got Carson Wentz, and, everyone knows the story about Carson Wentz. Can he do it? Is he good? Obviously he dealt with injuries in the past, but I think a team like Washington can really bring a guy, like Sam Howell or Kenny Pickett or even, Desmond Ritter, whoever's honestly available by the time they get there, and really just let them build, let them learn from Carson, who's really been in the league for a while. So I think that's one team that's really going to try to go after a quarterback. Obviously I think that Minnesota, I think they're due for a backup. I know they just signed Kirk to 1 year, but, it's 1 year.
Yeah.
So you got to think long term. And, I think guys like Matt Corral or Sam Howell could fit that role,
For sure. No, it's definitely going to be interesting to see the way that, the quarterback position falls out throughout the rest of free agency and the draft. A team like New Orleans, a team like Philly, a team like Pittsburgh at that 18, 19, 20 spot. I know Philly has Jalen Hurts, but they were rumored in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes and, still are kind of in the middle of that. So we'll see what happens. But, New Orleans definitely needs a quarterback. I know Pittsburgh just signed Mitch Trubisky, but this could be similar to that Matt Ryan scenario that we were just talking about.
And I'll give a little shout out to my boy Carson Strong over in Nevada.
Okay.
Probably the most impressive stat I've ever seen. He actually finished this year with negative 208 rushing yards.
What?
I don't know how that's possible, but I'm sure scouts aren't too thrilled about that. So look for him to go later on in the rounds. But he's got probably the strongest arm in this draft, honestly.
Wow.
At 6'6", 220, absolute body.
Carson Strong, you got someone pulling for you out here in the beam, man. You definitely got to get those rushing yards up. If you need some legs, call this guy. But
stop kneeing the ball.
Yeah. Guys, two more position groups that I want to get to. The big meat, the O-line and the D-line. Ben, we'll jump in with the D-line first. I definitely think that there's a lot of depth at this position. And, a lot of these guys can go top three. A lot of these guys can go towards the back end or maybe even towards, other rounds and things like that. But, so guys, we're jumping in with the defensive line. Ben, a name that I want to talk about, arguably the biggest name talked about in the draft process, in the combine. And since college football really ended last year, is Aidan Hutchinson. Is he the real deal? Let's compare him to, some of the pass rushers that have gone, in the top. We're talking like Nick Bosa, just to say a name really quickly. We can even toss in some of like the Micah Parsons connections as well. So a bunch of the guys that have been going, in the top 10 picks in the NFL draft and the NFL Combine. How do you think Aidan Hutchinson holds up? Where do you think he's going?
Well, I mean, I think like where they have him now is accurate. I do think he's the premier edge rusher out of this draft. He's just very fundamentally sound, very strong. 6'6", has the size, looks the role, is the role. Coming out of Michigan too. I think Harbaugh did a great job of coaching him up. I think Michigan's always produced great edge rushers. Shout out to my boy Chase Winovich on the Pats. I guess that's one that we could call a question mark, but they have been consistently producing great edge rushers out of Michigan, and I think Aidan Hutchinson fits the description for that number one pick. I think whether he goes to Jacksonville or if he goes to Detroit, wherever he goes, he's going to make an impact right away. He's, like I said, his football IQ through the roof, very strong. Very quick off that first step off the line. Kind of a nightmare for tackles. So it'll be fun to watch where he goes. Obviously expect to watch him go 1 or 2, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, it's interesting to see him linked to Detroit coming from Michigan. I mean, I feel like that's an obvious connection, but what happens with Jacksonville at 1 is going to be really interesting. Yeah. And what I want to do is I want to devote some time to some teams that I think can actually trade these picks. I think Jacksonville at 1 is definitely a team that I could see, moving the pick. And the reason why I say that is they got their tackle, right? They just made sure that they franchise tagged or extended the tackle that they had, Cam Robinson, I'm pretty sure it was. And also, at 6, at 7, the Carolina Panthers, if they're mentioned in the Deshaun sweepstakes, this is definitely a pick that would be going if Deshaun comes here.
That'd be
the New York Giants at 7, if they have 2 picks in the top 7, I really think that we could ship one of those 2 picks and get some more picks later on and just help better this team because, God, do we need it. The Jets pick at 10, second pick in the top 10. I'm just trying to think of a lot of these teams that have multiple first-round picks. When you think of a quarterback draft, a quarterback class like next year when you have Bryce Young, just to say a name, and a couple of these other guys that are playing absolutely unreal football right now at the collegiate level. You always want to think of the future, too, when you're building and sculpting your team. New Orleans at 18, I think, is another interesting fit because the reason why
Armstrong's a free agent, too, now, right?
What's that?
Armstrong's a free agent now?
Armstead. Teron Armstead, yes, left tackle. No, it's all good. But New Orleans, like, just when you're in a cap scenario and you owe $80 million, right? You want to get young. You want to get financially healthy, right? The best way to do it, move that first-round pick, get a bunch of second or third so the cap hit's going to be a lot less, and get quality guys. Still picking, 2 or 3 guys in the top 60 is absolutely essential, and I feel like New Orleans can do that at this scenario. But going to our next guy from Oregon, Kayvon Thibodeaux. This is someone that's linked to the Giants at 5. I think it's going to be interesting to see, what happens with these top picks, right? Does a quarterback go in the top 5? Do 3 offensive tackles go in the top 5? Do 3 defensive linemen go in the top 5? You know what I mean?
There's no one on offense go in the top 5. That'd be probably the first time ever, arguably.
Yeah, I mean, that would absolutely be crazy. I didn't even think of that possibly being a possibility. But, Kayvon Thibodeaux, I really think he's a solidified, locked-in top 6, 7 pick. Like I said, obviously depending on the way the quarterbacks go. But, Ben, you think, you could see the Giants taking him at 4? Do you think he could fall to outside the top 10? Or do you think he's a surefire top 5 pick?
I mean, I could see him after the Combine. Obviously he is a freak athlete. I know he did deal with some injuries at Oregon. I could see him falling out of the top 10. Nothing to his, lack of athleticism or anything, but, there's just so many edge rushers in this draft. You got the guy from Purdue as well, Karlaftis, I believe his name is. Not great at pronouncing.
You got it.
But, there's just so many options, and you look at the injury history, that's something that teams really do take into consideration. So, in my opinion, I think he should go top 5, when it comes to athleticism. Similar to Aidan Hutchinson, his first step off the ball is ridiculous.
Oh my God,
just an absolute nightmare for tackles. So athletically, when it comes to like an all-around skill set, I believe he is a top 5. But then you kind of look at the little background check, and it kind of, to me, it takes him out of the top 5, but definitely top 10.
Oh, that's interesting, taking him out the top 5. Ben, when I want to talk about 3 guys from Georgia that are all debatable top 10 picks, right? We have Trayvon Walker at that edge position, Devontae Wyatt, and Jordan Davis, who absolutely blew people away at the scouting combine. And look, if the Giants went 2 of these 3 guys with their top 7 picks, I'd be absolutely okay with that.
You can't mess with any of them.
That's what I'm saying. Georgia's been producing like crazy the past couple of years. I do think that they all have their own little skill sets that make them all stand out. Like I said, Trayvon Walker, I think he's more of that edge sack production guy. Jordan Davis, I kind of see him as more as that run stopper, but can really clog up the middle. And then Devontae Wyatt really just kind of reminds me of Grady Jarrett a little bit, from Atlanta. Just, really aggressive and dominant defensive tackle that can just really do it. And, Georgia's, like I said, has been producing like crazy. So I think 3 of these guys will absolutely go in the top 15. I actually think that all 3 of them can make a serious impact. But I also think, when you take a lot of this into consideration, right? Do you think like a lot of these guys, 3 of them being from Georgia, that'll probably go in the top 10? You think that's more of like a schematic thing, them being, being part of Georgia's defense that's really elevating them to be top 15 pick? Or do you think like individually these guys can all ball out and can all arguably be, a top defensive player?
Yeah, I mean, I think schematically, obviously it was to their advantage, but you also got to look like the fact that these 3 was their D line, like that's a nightmare, like you have to prepare for 3 different guys on that D line. And I think that, especially at the college level, obviously not every O-lineman they face is going to play on Sundays. But, when you have to worry about Jordan Davis, Trayvon Walker, and, the third one, it's pretty tough to keep an eye on all of them. There's only so many O-linemen on a field at a time. So, in my opinion, I think schematically, like, Georgia did a great job of utilizing all of them and bringing the best out of them. And I think, as we kind of watch the combine and we get ready for pro days, you'll be able to see a little more, like, one-on-one what these guys are capable of. But, I think Georgia has done a great job, especially in the past, too, of just producing great defensive players. You even look at their safeties and DBs. Like that defense was letting up like 7 points a game at one point.
Crazy.
And that again, like it comes with having great defensive players, but like the scheme on defense was obviously in their favor. So I will give credit to the DC over at Georgia, but I do see all these guys making a great impact right away.
Yeah, they got to be doing their thing. So, Ben, last guys that I wanted to talk about, I kind of want you to make a pick here because I think both of these guys, are going to go back end first or debatably, top second. But we got David Ojabo from Michigan and we got Boye Mafe from Minnesota, 2 of the great edge pass rushers in this class. What's the guy that you're taking above the other? Can you go a little bit in depth on the reasons why? And like I said, any place that you see fit.
Yeah, I mean, It's tough to compare these 2. I think they're both really good. Boye Mafe, I've been watching him for the past couple of years. Big dude out of Minnesota, just creating havoc everywhere he goes. But then you look at a guy like Ojabo, his story, first of all, is just insane. Immigrant. I don't want to say where he's from because I forget. But, just seeing what he's had to deal with, you kind of love to see those kind of guys coming out of the draft, with the chip on their shoulder right away. Someone who's motivated to put his mom in a new house and retire and all that. Like every other player in the draft, but, watching Ojabo play alongside Aidan Hutchinson and, still standing out, it says a lot. Obviously, 1, to the scheme that Michigan was running and 2, his individual personality and, how he's able to shine on the field and, how I think personally he'll have a great transition to the pros, very mature, watching him in the combine with his meetings too, handles himself very well, very well spoken, and then just a freak athlete to top it all off, so I personally like Ojabo. I could see him personally, not to keep bringing up the Giants, but I could see I could see him falling to the Giants, with that late first round or top 10 pick. Honestly, not even in the top 10. I'll give him top 20. But I think, like I said, he's a top 20 player. I think he's a top 10 edge rusher easily. And I think that he'll have a great career, hopefully. Not with the Giants, but that's where I see him going.
All right, so we don't have too much time left. One player, you could just say a name of one player that you want to highlight that you think is going to do really well throughout the rest of the process. I'm going to go to an offensive lineman, Tyler Lindenbaum from Iowa, the best center in the class. I definitely think that he's a name that's going to stick out and you guys will learn about. Do you have one name that you would like to share?
Yeah, I want to go Trent McDuffie out of Washington.
Okay.
He's a corner, smaller guy. I want to say around 5'10", 5'11".
From Washington?
Yep, but he's a freak athlete. He's all over the field. He's going to lock you up, man. He can play zone. His football IQ is through the roof, and he showed his athleticism at the combine. Jumping out of the gym and I'm pretty sure he was another guy around 4.5, 40. So, I think he'll be obviously a first-round pick. And, with the Pats not really re-signing J.C. Jackson, I don't think Trent McDuffie is the proper, size to replace that. But, I think the Pats could really utilize that, whether it be late first, early second. So, look for Trent McDuffie, in my opinion, to go and make an impact right away.
Nice. Guys, this was our top draft prospects. I hope you guys like Ben's breakdowns. He's been studying for this a little bit. He's been listening as a fan for a long time, so it was nice to finally get him on. That's right. Guys, we have so much other content. Make sure you go to YouTube, follow, like, subscribe, put that notification bell on. Guys, we have so much other content. Like I said, make sure you're following on social media, on Facebook. Go to sincethesandbox.net, leave a review. Make sure it's 5 stars. Peace out, guys. We'll be back soon.
For all things gridiron and hard top, it's Kevlu and C since the Sandbox.